Ethan Gray, Linda Harper, Rebecca Cole, Anna Mitchell. 4 names forever linked by a chilling pattern. Women who trusted a man only to become victims of a deadly scheme. Behind Ethan's charm hid a ruthless psychopath who married and murdered for life insurance money. This is the story of how love turned lethal, and how a town uncovered a dark secret that almost went unnoticed. Ethan Gray arrived in the small town of Maplewood on a chilly autumn afternoon. He stepped off the bus carrying a modest suitcase and a confident smile. At first glance, he seemed like any other newcomer trying to start fresh, polite, well-groomed, and friendly. But there was something about the way he moved and spoke that drew people in quickly. It was as if he had a natural gift for making strangers feel comfortable and important. Within days, Ethan found a job at a local hardware store. He was quick to learn, always eager to help customers, and soon earned the respect of his co-workers. The town, which was used to quiet routines and familiar faces, started to buzz with interest over this charming man who seemed to fit in perfectly. People began introducing him to friends and neighbors, proud to have someone new and likable among them. What no one knew yet was how quickly Ethan's life would intertwine with the lives of several women in the town, women who would soon become more than just acquaintances. Ethan had a habit of meeting women wherever he went, at the grocery store, community events, or even at church. He always had a warm compliment or a kind word ready, and he listened intently when others spoke. His gaze was steady and sincere, making it easy for people to trust him. The first woman he caught the attention of was Linda Harper, a widow in her late 40s. Linda was well known in Maplewood for her kind heart and love of gardening. She lived alone since her husband had passed away several years earlier. When Ethan started helping her carry groceries one afternoon, neighbors noticed how she smiled more than usual and how she seemed brighter in his company. Their courtship was swift but gentle. Ethan often visited Linda's house, bringing small gifts or homemade meals. He asked about her life and dreams, making her feel heard in a way she hadn't for years. Soon, the two were inseparable, often seen walking hand in hand around town or sitting together on the porch watching the sunset. Within just a few months, they decided to marry. The wedding was simple but joyful, a small gathering of family and friends celebrating their new beginning. For the townspeople, it seemed like a perfect match, a second chance for Linda to find happiness. However, there was one detail that raised eyebrows among a few observant residents. Shortly before the wedding, Linda had taken out a large life insurance policy naming Ethan as the sole beneficiary. She never spoke openly about it, and when asked, she would just smile and say it was a precaution for the future. Life seemed peaceful for the couple at first, but behind closed doors, things started to change. Linda began feeling unwell. She complained of constant headaches, dizziness, and nausea. At first, she dismissed it as stress, or maybe a flu, but the symptoms worsened rapidly. Within weeks, she was too weak to leave her bed. Doctors were called in, but despite their best efforts, Linda's condition baffled them. Tests showed no clear cause, and the final diagnosis was natural causes, possibly a sudden infection or an unknown illness. The town mourned the loss of a beloved woman, and Ethan appeared heartbroken. He spoke at her funeral with genuine sorrow, thanking everyone for their support. Yet, just weeks after Linda's passing, Ethan was seen again with another woman, Rebecca Cole. Rebecca was younger, in her early 30s, and worked as a school librarian. Like Linda, Rebecca was drawn to Ethan's charm and kindness. She was careful at first, aware of how quickly things had happened with the previous marriage, but Ethan's persistence was convincing. Rebecca and Ethan's relationship moved fast. Within a few months, they announced their engagement. Again, before the wedding, Rebecca took out a large life insurance policy, naming Ethan as the beneficiary. This time, some neighbors whispered suspicions. It seemed too much like déjà vu. But no one wanted to believe something sinister was at play. Rebecca's health also took a sudden downturn. She complained of weakness and fainting spells. On one fateful evening, she was found unconscious in her home and rushed to the hospital. Doctors determined she had overdosed on a medication she was taking for anxiety. The overdose was ruled accidental, and Rebecca passed away shortly after. The town was stunned. 2 wives, 2 sudden deaths, and both tied to Ethan Gray. Whispers turned to gossip, and gossip soon became rumors. People began questioning how one man could experience such tragedy twice without suspicion. Some felt pity for Ethan, thinking he was cursed or deeply unlucky. Others grew wary, wondering if there was more to the story. Despite growing doubts, no one had any proof to accuse Ethan of wrongdoing. The police had opened preliminary investigations but found no solid evidence. Toxicology reports were inconclusive, or pointed to causes that could be explained away as accidents or illnesses. Insurance companies started to feel uneasy, but they were still paying out the policies to Ethan, who appeared innocent on paper. Ethan himself continued to play the role of a grieving husband flawlessly. He kept a low profile, attended community events, and even volunteered at the local shelter. To outsiders, he was a man caught in a cruel twist of fate. But those who looked closer began to notice inconsistencies. Sometimes, Ethan's eyes would flash with something cold and calculating before he masked it with his usual smile. A third woman soon entered the scene, Anna Mitchell, a quiet artist who had moved to Maplewood seeking inspiration and peace. She met Ethan at a coffee shop and was charmed by his attention and thoughtful conversations. Unlike the others, Anna was more cautious. She took her time getting close to Ethan, but eventually agreed to marry him. Anna also secured a life insurance policy, naming Ethan as the beneficiary. The pattern was now unmistakable to anyone paying attention. But this time, some residents decided to take action. They began gathering information, documenting Ethan's rapid marriages and the insurance policies that followed. Anna's death, however, shocked everyone in a new way. She died in her sleep, with no signs of illness or trauma. The coroner's report stated natural causes, but a few experts raised questions about the suddenness and timing. It was clear that this was no longer a coincidence. The local newspaper ran stories about the mysterious deaths surrounding Ethan Gray, and soon the case drew attention from outside Maplewood. Insurance companies demanded more detailed investigations, and the police intensified their efforts. But Ethan had vanished without a trace. As the sun set over Maplewood, the town was left grappling with fear and disbelief. A man who had once seemed like a blessing had turned into the center of a chilling mystery. Behind his friendly smile lay secrets that no one could have imagined. The truth about Ethan Gray was far darker than anyone could have guessed, and the town's peaceful days were about to be shattered forever. The quiet town of Maplewood was still reeling from the sudden death of Anna Mitchell when whispers began turning into something more serious. People were no longer content to believe these tragedies were mere accidents or strokes of bad luck. The truth seemed to be lurking just beneath the surface, and some residents were determined to uncover it. Detective Sarah Miller was assigned to the case when the third wife's death raised more questions than answers. A seasoned investigator, known for her sharp instincts and patience, she started by reviewing every detail of Ethan Gray's life since his arrival in town. What she found was disturbing. Ethan's marriages had all happened in quick succession, each ending with the unexpected death of his wife. More alarmingly, each wife had taken out a substantial life insurance policy before marrying him, with Ethan as the sole beneficiary. Sarah knew that coincidence could only go so far, and patterns like this rarely appeared by chance. But proving wrongdoing would not be easy. The townspeople were reluctant to speak openly. Some feared retaliation, while others simply didn't want to believe someone they had trusted could be capable of murder. Still, the detective pressed on. She requested the insurance documents from the companies involved and studied the policies closely. In every case, the policies were signed weeks or even days before the wedding, with Ethan clearly named to receive the full payout. This alone was unusual. Typically, life insurance policies took time to process and were not commonly purchased right before marriage. Yet here was a man who, time and again, became the beneficiary shortly before tragedy struck. Sarah also delved into the medical reports and autopsy findings from the three women. At first glance, each death had been ruled natural or accidental: poisoning, overdose, and sudden illness. But when she had the samples re-examined by toxicologists, the results revealed something chilling. Traces of rare and difficult-to-detect toxins were present in all three bodies. These poisons were not common household chemicals, but substances that could quietly and effectively end a life without immediate suspicion. With this new information, the detective grew more convinced that Ethan Gray was involved in the deaths of his wives. Yet, despite mounting evidence, there was no direct proof linking him to the poisonings. Ethan had been careful. He never left traces that could easily connect him to the crimes, and he always had a seemingly solid alibi. The investigation took on another dimension when Detective Miller discovered that Ethan was not who he claimed to be. Digging into his background, she uncovered that the name Ethan Gray was an alias. His real identity was tied to a string of similar cases in other states, cases involving multiple wives who had died under mysterious circumstances, each with insurance policies naming him as beneficiary. This revelation shocked everyone. It meant that Ethan had been moving from town to town, marrying women under different names, collecting insurance money, and leaving behind a trail of tragedy. For years he had slipped through the cracks of law enforcement by changing his identity and location regularly. Detective Miller reached out to other jurisdictions and pieced together a timeline of Ethan's movements. It became clear that he was a methodical and calculating killer. His pattern was always the same: charm a woman, marry her quickly, ensure she took out a life insurance policy with him as the beneficiary, then poison her subtly to avoid suspicion. After the death, he would collect the insurance payout and disappear. Maplewood's residents were horrified to learn that their friendly neighbor was in fact a cold-blooded serial killer. The town that had once welcomed Ethan with open arms now viewed him with fear and suspicion. But there was still one problem. Ethan was nowhere to be found. Following the discovery of his true identity, the police issued a warrant for his arrest. They believed he might attempt to flee, so they warned border control and transportation agencies to watch for anyone matching his description. But days turned into weeks, and Ethan seemed to have vanished completely. Just as hope for a quick resolution faded, a break in the case came from an unexpected source. A woman named Claire Jennings, a close friend of Ethan's most recent fiancée, contacted the police with alarming information. Claire had become suspicious after hearing about the fates of Ethan's previous wives. Unlike the others, Ethan's fourth intended victim had started asking questions, noticing inconsistencies in Ethan's stories and behavior. Claire revealed that the woman, named Julia, had taken drastic precautions. She had become aware of the danger she was in, and with Claire's help had faked her own death to lure Ethan out. Julia's staged death was convincing enough to fool the authorities, and more importantly, Ethan himself. Detective Miller and her team coordinated with Julia to set a trap. They kept the news of Ethan's identity and the ongoing investigation quiet to avoid alerting him. Meanwhile, Julia agreed to secretly meet with Ethan under controlled conditions, allowing police to monitor and gather evidence. When Ethan reappeared, confident that he had escaped suspicion, he was unaware of the net closing around him. Surveillance captured him discussing plans with Julia, and soon enough, incriminating evidence surfaced. The police found hidden vials of poison in Ethan's belongings and discovered financial records showing large insurance payouts collected after the deaths of his previous wives. Julia's bravery and the tireless work of Detective Miller finally brought Ethan into custody. The once charming man was now a prisoner, stripped of his carefully crafted identity and facing serious charges: multiple counts of murder, insurance fraud, and identity theft. The news of Ethan's arrest spread rapidly through Maplewood and beyond. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief, but also mourned the lives lost and the trust shattered. The case sparked conversations about how such a manipulative person had been able to deceive so many and highlighted the need for better oversight of life insurance policies. Ethan's story was a grim reminder that evil could hide behind the most ordinary faces. His ability to exploit love, trust, and hope for his gain left scars on the community that would take years to heal. But with justice finally within reach, Maplewood began to rebuild, determined never to forget the victims, and to stay vigilant against such darkness in the future. Would you like me to continue with Chapter 3 next? Sure. Here's an expanded Chapter 2 with approximately 1,000 words, continuing the story with suspense and clear, simple language, without headings. The town of Maplewood was still shaken after the sudden death of Anna Mitchell, Ethan Gray's third wife. People had begun to notice a disturbing pattern: 3 wives, all dead within months of marrying the same man, each with large life insurance policies that named Ethan as the sole beneficiary. Rumors started spreading quietly at first, then louder as the townsfolk grew uneasy. Whispers of suspicion floated through grocery stores, coffee shops, and church gatherings. But despite the talk, no one wanted to believe that a man so charming could be capable of something so dark. The local police department felt the pressure as well. Detective Sarah Miller, a veteran investigator with a reputation for thoroughness, was assigned to look into the strange series of events surrounding Ethan Gray. From the start, she noticed that this case was unlike most others. The deaths had been ruled natural or accidental, and the evidence was thin. Still, the coincidences were too glaring to ignore. Sarah began by collecting every bit of information she could about Ethan's life in Maplewood. She examined marriage certificates, insurance documents, hospital reports, and financial records. What stood out immediately was the timing of the life insurance policies. Each woman had taken out a sizable policy shortly before marrying Ethan. In every case, Ethan was the sole beneficiary, meaning he would receive all the money if something happened to his wife. This was not typical behavior, Sarah knew. Usually, Life insurance policies were used to protect families financially or cover funeral expenses, not taken out just before marriage in amounts large enough to raise eyebrows. Yet here was a man whose wives all did just that. Sarah contacted the insurance companies to request more details on the policies. They were cooperative, but cautious. These companies had started to suspect fraud or foul play themselves after the payouts to Ethan following each wife's death. Still, the policies were legally valid, and the deaths had not been proven as anything but unfortunate accidents. Meanwhile, Sarah also revisited the medical and autopsy reports for all three women. Initially, the causes of death were puzzling. Linda Harper, the first wife, had died from poisoning, but the substance was subtle and could easily have been mistaken for natural illness. Rebecca Cole's death was ruled an accidental overdose, and Anna Mitchell's sudden passing was called natural causes, possibly a heart failure or stroke. Determined to find more concrete proof, Sarah ordered a fresh round of forensic tests on preserved samples. What the lab uncovered sent chills down her spine. All three women had traces of unusual toxins in their bodies, poisons that were rare and difficult to detect. These substances could cause symptoms mimicking natural illness or accidents, which explained why the original investigations missed them. The evidence was growing, but Sarah faced a major hurdle. Linking these toxins directly to Ethan Gray, he had been careful not to leave fingerprints or any direct traces. His alibis were solid, and neighbors saw nothing suspicious. Ethan maintained the perfect image of a grieving husband, attending funerals and community events, always polite and composed. While Sarah was piecing together the case, she made a shocking discovery about Ethan's identity. Digging into his past, she found that Ethan Gray was not his real name. He had a long history of using false identities and moving from town to town. Records showed that similar cases had appeared in several states. Men who married women, collected insurance money after their mysterious deaths, and vanished. This revelation opened a new path for the investigation. Authorities in other states were contacted, and together they traced a timeline of his movements and crimes. It became clear that Ethan was a serial predator, a calculating man who used charm and deceit to trap vulnerable women, marry them, and murder them for financial gain. Back in Maplewood, the town's atmosphere grew tense as word of Ethan's true nature leaked out. People who had welcomed him warmly now saw him as a dangerous threat. Yet Ethan himself was nowhere to be found. Shortly after the investigation intensified, he disappeared. Police issued a warrant for his arrest and alerted nearby states and agencies. They warned airports, bus stations, and highways to watch for him. But despite the manhunt, Ethan remained elusive, as if he had vanished into thin air. Then, an unexpected breakthrough came from Julia, the woman who was supposed to be Ethan's fourth wife. Julia had met Ethan shortly after Anna's death and had become suspicious early on. Unlike the others, Julia noticed discrepancies in Ethan's stories and strange behavior that made her uneasy. She quietly began to investigate him on her own. Fearing for her safety, Julia reached out to a close friend named Claire Jennings. Together they devised a plan for Julia to fake her own death. They wanted to trap Ethan and force him into making a mistake. Julia's death was staged convincingly. Medical records, a funeral service, even a memorial plaque. To the outside world, Julia was gone. With the police's help, Julia kept contact with Ethan under close surveillance. Her apparent death gave the authorities the perfect opportunity to watch how Ethan would react. They suspected he would try to claim the insurance money or make contact with someone close to Julia. Sure enough, Ethan reappeared, confident that his secret was safe and that no one suspected his true nature. Surveillance caught him attempting to access Julia's bank accounts and communicating with people who might help him cover his tracks. More importantly, police searched his belongings and found vials of poison, detailed plans for future marriages, and fake identification cards. The evidence was overwhelming. Ethan was arrested and charged with multiple counts of murder, insurance fraud, and identity theft. His carefully constructed life of lies came crashing down. The news of Ethan's capture sent shockwaves through Maplewood and the surrounding communities. People were horrified to learn how close the danger had been and how many lives had been destroyed. Families of the victims felt a mixture of relief and sorrow, knowing that justice was finally being served, but the pain of loss would never fully heal. The investigation into Ethan Gray's crimes also exposed flaws in how insurance policies were monitored. Changes were soon made to tighten regulations and prevent similar abuses. The case became a cautionary tale about trust and deception, reminding everyone that sometimes evil wears the mask of a loving partner. Maplewood slowly began to recover, but the scars left by Ethan's actions remained. His story would be remembered, not only as a grim chapter in the town's history, but also as a warning to stay vigilant when something seems too good to be true. The arrest of Ethan Gray was only the beginning of a long and complex process. Although the police had him in custody, many questions remained unanswered. How had he managed to fool so many people for so long? Were there more victims out there? And most importantly, how would the justice system deal with a man so skilled in deception and destruction? Ethan was taken to a high-security detention center where he was questioned extensively. He remained calm and collected, refusing to admit to any wrongdoing. His lawyer argued that there was no direct proof tying him to the deaths, and that the evidence was circumstantial. Ethan insisted that he was a victim of false accusations, and that the women's deaths were tragic accidents. Despite his claims, the detectives and prosecutors knew the truth was far more sinister. They carefully built a case based on the accumulated evidence, the insurance policies, the toxicology reports, the forged identities, and the pattern of manipulation. Yet, to ensure a conviction, they needed to present the story in a way that the jury could understand, one that revealed the cold, calculated nature of Ethan's crimes. During the pretrial investigation, Sarah Miller worked closely with a team of forensic experts, psychologists, and financial investigators. They uncovered even more disturbing details about Ethan's past. Before arriving in Maplewood, he had lived in several different states under various names, always leaving behind a trail of broken lives and suspicious deaths. Ethan's method was chillingly consistent. He would identify women who were lonely or vulnerable, often widows or those recently separated. Using charm and false promises, he would quickly gain their trust and convince them to marry him. Before the wedding, he would persuade them to take out large life insurance policies with him as the beneficiary. Then, he would slowly poison them, ensuring their deaths looked natural or accidental. The psychological profile of Ethan painted a picture of a true psychopath, someone who felt no remorse or empathy for his victims. He was manipulative, deceitful, and extremely intelligent. This was a man who enjoyed control and who saw people as nothing more than tools to be used and discarded. As the trial date approached, the community of Maplewood struggled to come to terms with the horrors uncovered. Families of the victims attended every hearing, desperate for justice but still haunted by their losses. Many residents felt a mix of anger and guilt, wondering how they could have missed the signs or trusted Ethan so easily. The trial itself was intense and emotional. The prosecution laid out the evidence meticulously, explaining the patterns of behavior, the financial gains, and the forensic results. Experts testified about the poisons used and how they were administered in small doses over time. Witnesses spoke about Ethan's charm and how he had quickly ingratiated himself with the women and the town. The defense team tried to discredit the evidence, arguing that there was no proof Ethan had directly caused the deaths and that the poisons could have come from other sources. They painted Ethan as a grieving husband who had suffered unimaginable losses. But the jury was not convinced. One of the most powerful moments in the trial came when Julia, the woman who had faked her death to trap Ethan, testified. She described how she had become suspicious and the fear that had driven her to take drastic action. Her courage in helping the police was widely praised and helped to humanize the victims in the eyes of the court. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury found Ethan Gray guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life, imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The verdict brought a sense of closure to the community, but it did not erase the pain or the questions about how such evil had gone unnoticed for so long. In the aftermath of the trial, Maplewood began a healing process. Support groups formed for the families affected by Ethan's crimes, and the community worked together to raise awareness about domestic abuse and financial exploitation. The case also prompted lawmakers to review insurance policies and improve safeguards to prevent similar schemes. Detective Sarah Miller continued her work, helping other towns investigate suspicious deaths linked to individuals with similar patterns. She became an advocate for victims of manipulative criminals, speaking publicly about the importance of vigilance and education. Though justice had been served, the shadow cast by Ethan Gray lingered. His actions had left deep wounds in the hearts of those who had trusted him, and his story became a chilling reminder of how appearances could be deceiving. Maplewood's residents vowed never to forget the victims or allow such darkness to take root in their community again. The town had faced its darkest hour, but it emerged stronger, united by the resolve to protect one another and seek the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. Even after Ethan Gray was behind bars, the ripples of his crimes continued to spread far beyond Maplewood. The public and media were fascinated, horrified yet captivated by the story of a man who had married and murdered multiple women just for money. The documentary teams, journalists, and true crime enthusiasts descended upon the small town, eager to uncover every detail of the chilling case. Maplewood found itself thrust into the spotlight, a quiet town now infamous for harboring a calculating psychopath. The police department, still recovering from the intensity of the investigation, was flooded with calls from concerned citizens and families from other states. Many wanted to share their own experiences or report suspicious activities. It became clear that Ethan's story was not isolated. Across the country, cases with eerily similar patterns surfaced. Women marrying men who quickly gained financially from their deaths, often under suspicious circumstances. The pattern of marrying, collecting insurance money, and leaving a trail of broken lives was alarmingly common. Sarah Miller found herself working beyond Maplewood, assisting other law enforcement agencies in piecing together cases that might be linked to Ethan or individuals like him. It was a dark revelation. People who preyed on love and trust for financial gain were more widespread than anyone had realized. Their tactics were chillingly similar: the charm, the quick courtships, the sudden deaths masked as accidents or illnesses, and the swift collection of insurance payouts. Meanwhile, in Maplewood, the victims' families struggled to rebuild their lives. Grief was a constant shadow, but they found strength in each other's support. Memorials were held for the women Ethan had killed: Linda, Rebecca, Anna, and others who had never been fully identified. The town made efforts to remember them, not just as victims, but as women with dreams, hopes, and stories interrupted by a ruthless killer. Julia, whose brave actions had helped capture Ethan, continued to work with the police as a consultant. Her experience gave her a unique perspective on how predators operated and how to protect potential victims. She became an advocate for women's safety, speaking at community centers and schools about the warning signs of manipulation and abuse. Despite these positive steps, many questions lingered about Ethan himself. How had he developed such a cold, calculating mind? Psychologists who studied his case concluded that Ethan fit the profile of a psychopath, someone unable to feel empathy or guilt, skilled at deception, and driven purely by self-interest. They believed his behavior was shaped by a combination of genetic factors and early childhood trauma, though the exact details of his upbringing remained elusive. What was clear was that Ethan had mastered the art of disguise. His ability to create new identities, change locations, and manipulate those around him was frightening. His crimes went undetected for years because he was careful and patient, always planning his next move. He treated people as objects, tools to be used and discarded, with no regard for the pain he caused. The legal aftermath of the case also brought attention to the life insurance industry. Regulators and lawmakers scrutinized policies that allowed such easy access to large sums of money, especially when purchased just before marriage. New laws were proposed to include mandatory waiting periods, better background checks, and improved communication between insurance companies and law enforcement. Insurance companies themselves implemented stricter rules to flag suspicious activity. They introduced algorithms to detect unusual patterns, such as multiple policies taken out by the same beneficiary in short periods, or multiple deaths connected to one individual. These changes aimed to prevent criminals like Ethan from exploiting the system again. The media's fascination with the case led to a surge in true crime documentaries, podcasts, and books. Ethan Gray became a symbol of the dangers hidden behind seemingly ordinary faces, a cautionary tale about the need for vigilance and awareness. But with the fame came challenges. Some families felt their grief was being exploited for entertainment, and the constant attention reopened old wounds. Maplewood worked hard to balance the desire for justice with respect for the victim's privacy. Community leaders organized events focused on healing and education rather than sensationalism. They encouraged residents to look out for one another and to speak up if something seemed wrong, fostering a culture of care and caution. On a personal level, Sarah Miller found her life forever changed by the case. The intensity of the investigation and the weight of the crimes weighed heavily on her. Yet, she felt a sense of purpose in helping bring Ethan to justice and preventing future tragedies. Her dedication inspired many young officers and investigators who saw her as a role model in the fight against complex crimes. In the months and years that followed, Maplewood slowly healed. The scars remained, but so did the resilience of a community determined to protect its members and remember those who were lost. The story of Ethan Gray, the psychopath who married and murdered women for their insurance policies, became a permanent part of the town's history. A dark chapter that also sparked change, awareness, and a renewed commitment to justice. Years had passed since Ethan Gray's arrest and conviction, but his story continued to echo through the lives of those affected and the town of Maplewood itself. The trial had closed one chapter, but the consequences of his actions stretched far beyond the courtroom, affecting families, communities, and even national policies. In Maplewood, the victims' families had slowly found ways to cope with their losses, though the pain never fully disappeared. For many, the memories were bittersweet. Pride in seeing justice served, but sorrow for the loved ones they would never see again. Each family created their own ways to honor the women Ethan had taken. Some set up scholarships in their names, others held annual remembrance events, and a few worked to support organizations that helped protect vulnerable people from manipulative predators. Julia, whose courage had played a critical role in exposing Ethan, continued her advocacy work with renewed passion. She partnered with nonprofits dedicated to educating people about domestic abuse, financial exploitation, and the warning signs of dangerous relationships. Julia spoke openly about her experience, urging others to trust their instincts and seek help if something felt wrong. Her story became a beacon of hope, showing that even in the darkest situations, bravery and support could lead to justice. Ethan's imprisonment was secure, but his case remained a source of fascination and study for criminal psychologists, law enforcement, and the public. Experts used his case to better understand psychopathic behavior and to develop more effective ways to detect and prevent similar crimes. They highlighted the importance of early intervention, improved communication between agencies, and comprehensive background checks. On the legal front, Ethan's case had sparked significant reforms in the insurance industry. New regulations required longer waiting periods before life insurance policies could be cashed out, especially when purchased just before marriage. Insurance companies developed better systems to detect suspicious activity and cooperated more closely with law enforcement. These changes aimed to close the loopholes Ethan had exploited and to protect innocent people from falling victim to similar schemes. The Maplewood Police Department also grew stronger. Inspired by the lessons learned during the investigation, they expanded training programs focused on recognizing signs of manipulation, financial crimes, and complex psychological profiles. Detective Sarah Miller, now promoted to a leadership position, became a mentor to younger officers. She emphasized the importance of patience, persistence, and empathy in solving crimes that often had hidden depths. Despite these positive outcomes, the emotional toll of Ethan's crimes lingered. The community's trust had been shaken, reminding everyone that evil could hide behind the most ordinary faces. People became more cautious in their relationships, learning to balance openness with careful scrutiny. Ethan himself remained a figure shrouded in darkness. In prison, he showed no remorse, maintaining the cold, calculating demeanor that had characterized his life. Interviews conducted by psychologists revealed little about his motivations beyond a selfish desire for money and control. He seemed incapable of genuine human connection, reinforcing the chilling reality of his psychopathic nature. Occasionally, Ethan tried to appeal his conviction, claiming procedural errors or lack of evidence. But the courts rejected his appeals, reaffirming the strength of the case against him. The evidence was overwhelming, and the testimony from survivors and experts had painted an undeniable portrait of his crimes. For Maplewood, Ethan Gray's story became a turning point. The town transformed its fear and grief into action and awareness. Schools added lessons on personal safety and emotional intelligence. Community groups organized workshops on spotting manipulative behavior. Local media supported efforts to spread information and resources for victims of abuse. The collective effort created a safer environment where people felt empowered to protect themselves and each other.
Maplewood's experience served as a model for other towns facing similar challenges, demonstrating that even in the face of darkness, communities could find strength and resilience. At the heart of this transformation were the victims, the women who had been silenced by Ethan's greed and cruelty.
Their stories inspired change and reminded everyone of the preciousness of life and trust. Though their lives were cut short, their impact was profound. As time moved on, the shadow of Ethan Gray faded, but never disappeared completely. His crimes remained a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind trust and the importance of vigilance. Maplewood continued to honor the memories of those he had harmed by fostering a culture of care, respect, and justice.